Hey everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. New and improved, now with added calcium for stronger bones and teeth. Yes, I am your healthy afternoon snack. Or evening if you're watching one of the replays of the show. I don't know why you wouldn't be home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to watch the show live. What do you have, jobs or something? Suckers. Anyway. Welcome to the show. Before we get rolling, really quick, I want to remind everybody, I think I mentioned it. Yeah, I did mention it last week. June 21st, got another psychic event coming up at the Healing Tree Wellness Center and Spa in Londonderry, New Hampshire. So come on down. The Healing Tree, of course, is one of the places where I work, where I do hypnosis and hypnotherapy, help people to quit smoking, lose weight, things like that, basic phobias, etc. You know the deal. You've heard me talk about it before. So please come on down. Again, that is June 21st, just I think that's about a week and a half away. It is a Saturday. It starts 10 a.m., wraps up at 4 p.m. So I'll have to check, but I think we have it up on at ipmnation.com/events for more details on that. So I'll be there, of course. Norm will be there as well. Norm Moody. He's kind of the superstar at these. He's busy all day. So if you want a reading with Norm, make sure you get there first thing in the morning, because he's usually booked all day, but a lot of great people will be there, of course, and I'll be there. So I hope to see you there. Like I always say, if you're in the area, I'd love to see you, and if you're not, it's worth the drive. So, and today on the show, this week on the show, obviously the big political news right now nationally is the fall of Eric Cantor, which is really interesting, and we will talk about it, but we have something to deal with first. Last week on the television edition, I talked about Pat Robertson. Pat Robertson, of course, the octogenarian televangelist who on 700 Club says a lot of nutty things, as an octogenarian televangelist would be expected to do. Whoops, I just sent my hand flying into the microphone. It's because I'm excited. I'm about to come unleashed. So I try not to do that, but which is funny because we had a conversation last week about people touching the microphones and it making noise, and then this week I did it. It's probably a combination of the unleashing and the massive amounts of caffeine that I take into my system. You may or may not have been able to tell, but it's my drug of choice, you know. Never done any hard drugs in my life, and I've only been stoned a handful of times, but I drink massive amounts of caffeine. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Which is why I always look tired, because I don't sleep much. But I talked last week about Pat Robertson, and I actually gave Pat Robertson credit for something. Pat Robertson is, despite what one would assume, given the history of the things that he says and what he believes, etc., one would assume that Pat Robertson is a creationist. But Pat Robertson is not a creationist, and without getting back into all of that, just to recap very, very quickly, last week I discussed how Pat Robertson is fighting some people who would normally agree with him on 99.9% of things involving religion and spirituality. But Pat Robertson, for example, he's been fighting with Ken Ham, who is the owner of the Creationist Museum in Kentucky. Again, if you're new to the show, I apologize for the air quotes. I know that it's a bit pretentious, but I can't say Creationist Museum. I have to say Creationist Museum. Ken Ham has been very publicly angry with Pat Robertson for being a non-creationist, as well as Rick Wiles and some other folks. And Pat Robertson has been very blunt about it and said, look, you have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to believe that the earth is only thousands of years old instead of billions. And that is very surprising. Pat Robertson is just about one of the last people I would expect to reject creationism. Pat Robertson essentially believes in a term that, for whatever reason, probably 10 years ago now, fell out of the American vernacular, and that term is, of course, intelligent design. Pat Robertson believes in evolution and believes in what, again, we don't use the term anymore, but what amounts to intelligent design, that God did create everything, but it's been God's guiding hand in terms of evolution. And so I guess Pat Robertson, though he doesn't go quite this far, I think it's safe to assume that he is someone who says, well, let's not take the Old Testament literally, which was how I was raised, by the way. I was raised Catholic, and Catholics, many of them, don't take the Old Testament literally. That's how I was raised. I was told, they're parables, they're stories. The New Testament, yes, take that literally, but not the Old Testament. Not that I'm particularly religious now in my adult life. For those of you new to the show, I regard religion, organized religion, as being essentially political, not spiritual. But we won't get into all that right now for the purposes of this discussion. But so last week, I actually gave Pat Robertson credit. Now, I did cap that discussion off with sort of a disclaimer saying that while I do give Pat Robertson credit for being a non-creationist, and again, one of the last people I would ever expect to be a non-creationist, or I might also use the term reasonable, there are plenty of other things to ridicule Pat Robertson for, and because I love ridiculing people who say crazy things, and to me it's one of life's great joys, and I hope that you enjoy that as well, and will partake in that with me on this program today. I said that on the following night on the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed, which is live every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Dr. Kevin Radio Network, dkrn.net, or you can get there through ipmnation.com as well. It takes you to the same portal that you can stream the show through. But I did say that I was going to go over some of the things that I was looking to ridicule Pat Robertson for, some of the crazy things that he has said, and basically undo all the credit that I gave him last week, because it's fun. Well, I never got to it last week on the radio edition, because what sometimes, perhaps even more often than not, to be really honest about it, but very often I will say on this version of the show, tomorrow night on the radio edition, I'm going to cover this, this, and this, and then something else happens, and something that I think is more pressing or more interesting politically comes up, and then I don't get to, on the radio edition, whatever it was that I promised I was going to get to at the end of the television edition. So I never got to my Pat Robertson ridicule last week. So I'm going to do that now. We'll get this out of the way. We'll cover a couple of other quick things, and then we'll dig in to the Eric Cantor, the fall of Eric Cantor. By the way, of course, if you are watching live, I would encourage you, feel free to call into the show. You can call the phone number on your screen. If there is no phone number on your screen, it's because you're not watching live. You're watching one of the replays. And if you want to know more about where you can see the show, or actually when you can see the show, you already know where you can see it because you're watching it right now. But ipmnation.com/MCUTV has all the times for the show, as well as links to the archives, because we archive all the episodes of the show on ipmnation.com as well. Also, there's a chat room there that you can use either during the live show or during any of the replays if you want to chat with either myself or other viewers. And of course, there's the Facebook page for Matt Connarton Unleashed, as well as Twitter. At ipmnation is my Twitter handle. You can reach me at any time there as well. Or if you just want to send me an email, matt@ipmnation.com. So all kinds of ways to keep in touch. And let's get into this article. This is from a while ago, but I just think this stuff is so entertaining. This is from what has become a favorite website of mine, rightwingwatch.org. And if you've never been to rightwingwatch.org, basically it highlights some of the crazy things that conservatives say that you should probably know about. And I would say you should know about these things whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter. Obviously, if you're a Democrat or just someone who is skeptical or just doesn't care for the Republican Party, this kind of stuff is fun. It's interesting, it's entertaining, and frightening. And if you're a Republican, I think you should also be looking at this stuff because you should know what your party is doing or what elements within your party are doing. And of course, we've seen kind of this some would say civil war. I think that's a bit of overblown hyperbole, but there are a lot of divisions, a lot of, we've seen these factions emerge within the Republican Party, and we saw that with Eric Cantor, in a sense, with his losing his primary last night in Virginia. But it's a great site, rightwingwatch.org. So this is titled Pat Robertson Demon Hunter. And what I'm going to share with you now is a list of things that Pat Robertson has said. Apparently, Pat Robertson, remember, Pat Robertson, non-creationist, believes that many things which seem innocent are actually demonic and can harm you. Let's go through the list. Paintings of Buddha can be infected with demon prayers and give you headaches. I've had a headache for a couple weeks now, but I just assume it's my sinuses. I don't have a painting of Buddha or a statue. Although my grandparents did when I was a kid. It was kind of fun. You could rub its tummy, make a wish, I guess. I don't know. What else do you do with Buddha? I'm not a Buddhist. I don't know what the protocol is for that. Last year, a man wrote to the 700 Club, worried that his niece's painting of Buddha amounted to idolatry. By the way, I don't think, if you're Catholic, you can't really, not that this person who wrote to Mr. Robertson necessarily is, but I think organized religion uses a lot of idolatry anyway, particularly Catholicism. But this man wrote and said, about the painting of Buddha, is it idolatry? Robertson said that it certainly is, and that, quote, you don't know what kind of demonic power is attached to that, unquote. Yes, it's an evil painting of Buddha. Explaining that he didn't want to get, quote, super spiritual on this thing, Robertson nevertheless advised that he would, quote, take that statue of Buddha or picture of Buddha and set it on fire, unquote. Yes. Hey, actually, you know what? Burning Buddha would be a really good name for a band. So any musicians watching the show, feel free to use that. Just try to give me credit. The conversation continued with Robertson describing how people can attach demon prayers to things like paintings of Buddha, and they can give you headaches and lead to marital strife. Yes, Buddha will ruin your marriage. Don't trust that Buddha. Maybe that's why so many married dudes, if they've been married a long time, they kind of, maybe aren't as worried about their appearance as they used to be. They kind of get a bit of a belly going. You know how some guys get that bowling ball effect? Maybe subconsciously they just want to be more like Buddha. And then that in turn ruins their marriage, because then the wife is no longer physically attracted to the husband because he's walking around with this big belly, big beer belly or whatever. It's really a Buddha belly. I think I'm starting to come around to Pat Robertson's way of thinking. So then his co-host, Terry Mewson, her last name is spelled Meeuwesen. That's a lot of vowels in a row there, E-E-U. I'm just going to pronounce it that way from now on. That's kind of fun. Terry Mewson, his co-host, said, I watch home and garden television, and that's a very common thing for people to decorate with now, and I'm mystified by it because it's a false god. And then Robertson replies, some of these things, they have demon prayers. And people, they bring one of these things into their homes, and all of a sudden they start getting headaches, and they start having marital discord, and they say, what's the matter? You've brought a demonic. A demon has attached itself to this piece of artwork. You just don't need these. Alrighty. Let's see, moving on to the next one, horoscopes. He says horoscopes are demonic and satanic. Responding to a viewer question in 2009, Robertson, who has attacked horoscopes for their demonic influence several times over the years, warned of their satanic pull. Robertson said, they are demonic. They come out of the satanic type of activity, and you don't want to deal with horoscopes. They're basically phony, but what's left of them it has a satanic pull to it. So he acknowledges that they're basically phony. So in other words, the person who sits in an office at a newspaper just making up horoscopes, they're drawing on demonic power to do so. This is my personal favorite. Feng Shui is, at best, demonic. In April 2010, Robertson told viewers that he once invited a Feng Shui expert to arrange the office of an internet company he founded in China, but the business went broke. And then he added, quote, "You don't want to fool with that stuff. It is at best demonic. At worst, it's superstition," unquote. As I mentioned, joking about it once before, but I actually, I was quite serious. I have the furniture in my living room is arranged in the shape of a pentagram. Couple months ago, one of the maintenance guys had to come into my apartment to repair something, and he probably noticed some of the CDs I have, and he was like, "Oh, you know what? If you arrange your furniture in a certain way, you can conjure up demons or something." And I said, "Oh, it sounds interesting." I don't go out much. Let's see. Oh, this is another interesting one. Some martial artists gain strength by inhaling some demon spirits. In November 2007, a viewer asked Robertson whether it was okay to accept a job teaching martial arts. Robertson posited that while some uses of martial arts can be helpful, as evidenced by Chuck Norris helping ghetto kids through martial arts, it can also be very dangerous. Why? Because according to Robertson, some martial artists gain their strength from a demonic source by inhaling some demon spirits. Oh my goodness, who knew? I did Jeet Kune Do for 4 years, and I had no idea that learning to defend myself was, I was actually in league with Satan that whole time. My goodness. I miss that, Jeet Kune Do. Oh, which also means I miss Satan. This one's interesting. Yoga is probably demonic, but Tai Chi is safe. Responding to a viewer question about whether it is permissible for a Christian to enroll in Tai Chi classes, Robertson explained, "I don't think it is of any demonic. I think it may be deist in origin." Or deist, sorry. But in any event, that's the idea. Chi is the life force, and so you're stimulating the life force. Beyond that, there's some of these things, I mean yoga, I think, and some of these mantras you say definitely have Buddhist and sometimes demonic origins. I don't think Tai Chi does. Well, he's obviously thought about this very deeply to arrive at such informed and informative conclusions. Let's see. This one won't surprise anyone. A lot of Christians feel this way. Psychics get their power from demons. In 2006, a viewer asked whether it was okay to listen to a TV psychic that claims to be a Christian. Robertson's response, "Don't do it, because psychics get their power from demons." Quote, "I don't believe any of these so-called psychics have something that doesn't come from demons," unquote. Alrighty. The movie Twilight is demonic and evil. Wow. I thought it was just really bad and lame. Sorry if there's any emo kids watching. Robertson has little patience for films and shows about ghosts, vampires, and other supernatural subjects. Earlier this year, Robertson explained that the Twilight film series is demonic and evil, and watching movies like that amounts to opening the door to demonic power and giving permission to demons. Actually, he might not be entirely wrong there, because I have heard some film critics say similar things about the Twilight series. So maybe he's not completely off base. This one's interesting. Adopted... Uh-oh, Glenn R.J. Willette's going to want to listen closely to this one. This could affect him. Adopting children from other countries may bring demonic influences with them. In May 2010, the 700 Club ran a long segment highlighting a Christian family that had adopted 2 young children from Uganda. The segment discussed the growing trend of Christian families taking in orphans from around the world, including highlighting Christian Broadcasting Network's own organization dedicated to helping orphans. Though the story seemed heartwarming, Robertson followed it with a warning for viewers. After explaining that people need to understand that adopting a child is a commitment for life, and not like you are having a dog and you can drop him off at the pound, Robertson had a second, much stranger warning about adopting children, saying, quote, if they have demonic influences, if they have some, perpractor? Never seen that word before. Of the dark arts in their background, you can never tell what's going to come out, unquote. So be careful. I guess the moral there is don't adopt children from other countries, because in the process of doing so, you may unwittingly also be adopting Satan. I hope you heard that, Glenn. Take heed. Girls levitating friends at sleepovers are entering a demonic realm. Getting a little sci-fi here or something. Responding to a viewer wondering if he made the right decision by not... Okay, is this even possible? You just at a sleepover, you just... What? Sorry. Responding to a viewer wondering if he made the right decision by not joining his friends at a palm reading at a local carnival, because those are legit, Robertson agreed it was a smart decision and ran down his usual list of occult practices, including, yet again, Ouija boards, tarot cards, and horoscopes. He proceeded to retell a common urban legend about levitation at a sleepover, which he said had happened not too far from here. The girls in question, Robertson explained, had entered a spiritual, demonic realm. Oh my goodness. Couldn't they have just watched a Twilight movie? I mean, that's apparently bad too, but it sounds safer at least. Robertson said, these little girls, I think a group out in town not too far from here, they were having one of these sleepovers and they started doing this seance business, and the next thing you know, one of them was levitating and it scared them to death because these things are real. This isn't, it starts out as play, but they're moving into a spiritual demonic realm. Terrifying. Shows about ghost hunters are clearly demonic. Oh, we have a show like that on IPM Nation called Shadows of the Night. I'm the executive producer. I'm executive producing Satan. Last year, Robertson told a viewer that, while it is not necessarily a sin to watch ghost hunting shows, quote, why would you be dealing with something that is clearly demonic? And it is demonic, unquote. Transitioning for no apparent reason into his personal history reading horoscopes, Robertson reiterated his belief that horoscopes are demonic. He continued, quote, you can feel almost a spiritual pull into these things, and I think they are activated by Satan himself, unquote. And finally, one more, sadly, because these are a lot of fun. I could do this all day. Of course, this won't come as a surprise. Halloween is a celebration of demonic forces. By the way, a couple years ago, on the radio edition of the show, I read a story. If you want to, I'm not going to bring it up. Well, I'm bringing it up now, but I'm not going to get into it now. But you can Google it. You can find it really easily if you're interested. There was a story about this town. I forget where. I'm pretty sure it was down south. Go figure. Where they a local pastor had actually started something called Jesus Ween. And if that sounds completely ridiculous and absurd, that's because it is, but it's also true. A pastor at a church very concerned about the celebration of Satan, also known as Halloween, started something called Jesusween in that town to combat the evil demonic forces of Halloween. If you think I'm making that up, Google it. It's true. But I'm not making it up, because if it sounds completely ridiculous and absurd and is somehow related to religion, most likely it is true. Okay, so a few days before Halloween in 2009, Pat Robertson labeled Halloween a celebration of the devil and a celebration of demonic forces. Robertson dismissed people that think Halloween is harmless and compared it to dabbling with demons by using Ouija boards or levitation. Robertson said, quote, "Ouija boards aren't harmless. Seances aren't harmless. All the things that people do, and a lot of young people just get their kicks out of having a Ouija board little cursor that travels across the board and answers some questions. And they have levitation. Some kids prayed and they get levitated. And all kinds of stuff happens. Is it real? Yes, it's real. But where does it come from? It comes from demons. It comes from demonic forces." So there you have it. If you want to avoid Satan, avoid yoga, but Tai Chi's okay. And be careful about how you arrange your furniture, and avoid Halloween, and just avoid anything that is different. Oh, and avoid adopting children from other countries. Again, Glenn, if you're listening, I don't want you to burn in hell. So that's why I'm reiterating that. So we'll get into Eric Cantor in a moment, but just a couple other quick things. I do spend a lot of time on the program ridiculing some of the crazy things that Republicans say. Like, of course, we saw in the 2012 election cycle, Todd legitimate rape Aiken. He's, and of course, any number of things that Sarah Palin has said and whatnot. It's funny. I was talking with, I won't reveal who I had this conversation with, because it was an off-air conversation. So I don't repeat things off-air, on-air. If I repeat them, I won't attribute to whom I had this conversation with unless I know in advance that it's okay. So I hadn't planned on mentioning this, and actually, this individual probably wouldn't mind if I identified them, but again, I prefer to play it safe on that and respect everyone's privacy. So, but I had a conversation off air with a Republican who said to me, the media is always reporting on all these crazy things that Republicans say, but don't you think that Democrats also say a lot of crazy things? And that goes underreported. And what I said was, well, of course, you'll hear Democrats say crazy things as well. And by the way, if you're new to the show, I'm not carrying anyone's water. I'm an independent, so I pick on both parties pretty mercilessly. Maybe one more than the other, because the Republican Party has some very colorful people in it, and I don't see an equivalence of that on the left. There's plenty of things about the left that also bother me, but I don't think the left has these crazy characters that emerge on the national stage. And what I said to this Republican was, I think Democrats are much more disciplined about not saying crazy things that are going to come back to bite them in public, because if there were an equivalence there and Democrats also said lots of crazy things, Fox News would be constantly reporting the insane things that Democrats say, and you just don't see that. This guy's come up before. This is from Huffington Post. Samantha Lackman wrote this. GOP state senator asks why America can't be more like Saudi Arabia. You might recognize the guy's name. I'll read this quickly. It's very short. A Republican state legislator miffed about an Arkansas judge's ruling that struck down the state's same-sex marriage ban suggested on a conservative radio show that politicians should emulate Saudi Arabia by basing laws off Christian doctrine, as Saudi Arabia does with Islam. State Senator Jason Rapert, yes, that is his last name. If my last name were Rapert, I might think about changing it. But it's just too easy to chuckle at. State Senator Jason Rapert appeared on the Dave Ellswick radio show last week, where he discussed Pulaski County Circuit Judge Chris Piazza's decision that overturned the state's constitutional amendment defining marriage as between a man and a woman. And by the way, this guy Rapert, he's no stranger to saying things like this, saying outlandish things that he gets picked on for. When judges assert the will of the people wholly in this country, they are pulling the rug out from underneath representative democracy. This is him, Rapert, talking. By the way, Saudi Arabia, they don't live under the same kind of law that we do. They live under the law that they see fit to live under there. We have that right here too, and that's why there's such an injustice here, unquote. Saudi Arabia, of course, is a country where women can't drive or play sports in school, and where they must ask a male relative's permission before they can leave the country, open a bank account, or begin a job. Rapert told Arkansas News in May, after Piazza's ruling, that he thought there could be a push to put an initiative allowing judicial recall elections on the ballot in November. Quote, Judge Piazza may not be on the ballot, but the court of public opinion is speaking, and I think that he's in big trouble, unquote. Rapert has a history of making inflammatory comments. At a rally in 2011, Rapert told Tea Party supporters in attendance that they should not allow, quote, minorities to run roughshod over what you people believe in, unquote. So, yes, we should be more like the Saudis. I'm sure we'd love to have that oil. Again, I do pick on Democrats as well as Republicans, and I'm going to pick on a Democrat right now with another very quick thing before we get to Eric Cantor. This came from Reuters, is reporting this. Barbara Liston is the author. It says here, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is under fire from medical marijuana supporters. This is, again, Reuters, June 10th from Orlando, Florida. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, a Florida congresswoman, who heads the U.S. Democratic National Committee, is coming under criticism in her home state from medical marijuana supporters and a top party donor who fault her stance on the issue. By the way, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, whenever I see her on my television, I don't want to pick on anyone because of their looks. So don't anyone take this as an ad hominem. It's just an observation. She looks like a Muppet. She doesn't look fully human. She looks like a Muppet. I see her and I'm looking for, are there strings attached to her making her move? Wasserman Schultz drew their ire by expressing concern over a November ballot initiative in Florida on permitting medical marijuana. She also voted against legislation in Congress to restrain the U.S. Department of Justice from enforcing laws against medical marijuana in states where it has been legalized, like Colorado. Political attack ads have been purchased by the advocacy group Americans for Safe Access, which has vowed to run ads until the November congressional elections against lawmakers who vote against pro-medical marijuana legislation, the group's spokesman Sean Bartlett said. In addition, John Morgan, an Orlando-based personal injury lawyer and one of the state's most Democratic donors, said he was withdrawing his support of Wasserman Schultz, one of the most visible faces in the party, which she is. You see her on MSNBC all the time. That's why I know she looks like a Muppet. Morgan, who largely financed the campaign to get the medical marijuana measure on the Florida ballot, said, quote, there are just core issues in 2014, and one of those is medical marijuana, unquote. Polls show strong public support among Floridians for legal use of medical marijuana. The Florida legislature last month passed a bill that would legalize but strictly limit the distribution of a non-euphoric strain of marijuana believed to reduce epileptic seizures. Governor Rick Scott said he will sign it into law. Good. November's referendum is a broader proposal that would allow physicians to recommend the regular form of marijuana to people with debilitating ailments. More than 20 U.S. states have laws permitting marijuana use to treat conditions such as cancer and epilepsy, but it remains an illegal drug under U.S. federal law. Wasserman Schultz, who is up for re-election in November, has criticized Florida's ballot initiative, saying it is written too broadly and does not ensure strong regulatory oversight. She said on her website, quote, "My view is that approval of the use of marijuana as a medical treatment should be handled responsibly and in a regulated manner that ensures its approval does not do more harm than good," unquote. A 30-second ASA ad stated that Wasserman Schultz, quote, "thinks it's okay for medical marijuana patients to go to federal prison," unquote. Morgan, whose family members have used medical marijuana for debilitating pain, said he raised $250,000 for Wasserman Schultz at his home a couple of years ago and said, quote, "I will never let her come to my house again for a huge fundraiser," unquote. I'm disgusted by this because this is my view. Unless you personally are suffering from a debilitating disease, unless you are dying from a terminal illness and are in extraordinary pain as a result of it, shut the hell up about medical marijuana. If you have any empathy or sympathy within you for other human beings and their suffering, you have no place making any judgments about what someone who is suffering, what they need to get them through to the end. You have no business making those judgments. I take a very hard line on this. There is no moral, ethical reason to deny anyone the use of medical marijuana, period, end of story. I don't care about studies that need to be done. I don't care about, we need to look at unintended consequences and what if we do this, will this happen and whatnot. I don't care about any of that. If people are suffering and there is something that exists that they can be given access to help them not suffer, then you have to allow them to have it. It is the only moral, ethical thing to do. The rest of this is all BS. We need to get over this. We need to get past this. Let them have it. Even if you are opposed to legalization of marijuana in the broad sense, even if you're opposed to even decriminalization, but things that I support, I think it's time we legalize it personally. But even if you oppose all of that, how anyone can say no on a moral and ethical level to medical marijuana is, to me, it's just evil. If people are suffering and there's a way to help them to not suffer, let them have it. I would challenge Debbie Wasserman Schultz or anyone else who feels the way that they do to look a person dying of cancer in the eyes and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I know that there's something that exists that will help ease your suffering, but we're the government and we know best and we've made the determination that you can't have it, so you can just suffer." I would challenge any of these people to look someone in the eyes who is suffering from a terminal illness or is in terminable pain and they've got no other options. Look them in the eyes and tell them you know what's best for them, or you're concerned about the broader consequences of letting them have something that is going to help them. It's disgusting to me. And you know what makes it all the more disgusting? Look, I can't prove it, but I'm sure that there is someone to whom Debbie Wasserman Schultz argues, just like anybody else in Washington, D.C., who opposes this stuff. There are people to whom they have to answer to. Lobbyists, campaign donors, people who want need medical marijuana to remain illegal. The pharmaceutical lobby, which is extremely powerful in Washington, law enforcement lobbies are always pushing to keep as much illegal as they possibly can. States where there are privately run prisons, and there are a lot of them, where the prisons are run by private companies instead of the state, and these private companies give a lot of money to these candidates to make sure that marijuana, whether it's medical or in any other form or instance, is kept illegal because they got to keep those customers coming in to the prison. And by customers, I mean prisoners. And if you start legalizing stuff, that's going to hurt their business. There are all kinds of political reasons. And that is the most disgusting thing of all. There are all kinds of political reasons why the people in charge pretend that they know what's best for you, when in reality they're only concerned about their own careers. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, make no mistake, she is a career politician in addition to being a Muppet, and she will continue to do whatever her donors and the lobbyists to whom she answers, whatever they continue to tell her to do. I'm sure that there is someone else pulling the strings, appropriately, if she is in fact a Muppet, who want to make sure that she keeps her foot on the neck of people who are suffering. And it's immoral, it's unethical, it's evil, and I hope there is a special place in hell for people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And if that sounds a little over the top, well, yeah, it's called Unleashed for a reason. I'm just telling you how I really feel. I try not to hate anyone. I hate people like her. I just... let's see. We got, one other quick thing. I won't filibuster on this, I promise, because we're already not three quarters, but I'm not good at math. We're already 2/3 of the way through the show. NPR is reported this. With more veterans needing health care, what will the cost be? I'm only going to read a couple of sentences here, but a new generation of American vets is home from war, about 2.6 million of them, and there are about 10 million older veterans, many from the Vietnam era, who are now hitting their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Taking care of both groups is getting more expensive. There's a quote here that really kind of sums up how I feel about this. This is Gary Augustine from the Disabled American Veterans Organization, DAV. He said this: if they can afford to pay for wars, they can afford to pay for the treatment after the wars. And that kind of sums it up. You know, if we can figure out ways to facilitate this horrendous foreign policy, endless wars, as Ron Paul calls them, going to new Iraq, going to new Afghanistan, things that are just reckless. I think under the Bush administration, our foreign policy just went completely off the rails. But if we can find the money to do these things, this adventurous foreign policy of ours, it should be a no-brainer to be able to find the money to pay for the treatment of our veterans. And, that he really kind of summed it up there. There is an argument that money is not the problem. Tom Coburn is kind of saying that. Tom Coburn, Republican from Oklahoma. And there's more of that here in the article. I might save the rest of this for the radio edition tomorrow night, but just very quickly, because I don't want to run out of time. I want to get to the Eric Cantor stuff. Very quickly, though, there is, as we learn more about how the VA operates and how the funding and so forth, there is a narrative emerging here that the problem is not the budget, it's not the amount of money that the VA spends, it's how the VA spends it. And it would appear that a big part of the problem is the bureaucracy of it all, because bureaucracy, by its nature, is slow and inefficient and ineffectual. And it's one of the reasons why my idea And Gary also brought it up. Gary Hopper, I think it was last week or the week before on Norman Friends when he came in early. He said this too. Let's get rid of the VA and shift it all to the private sector and let veterans go, to whatever doctors they need to go to, whatever hospitals they need to go to, whatever they need to do to take care of themselves physically or mentally, emotionally, in terms of PTSD and all that. Let them go wherever they need to go, do whatever they got to do, and the government pays for it, period. Pays for it in full, and that's it. And you begin to phase out the VA. And I think that even now, even more so now, I believe that would be a good way to begin to solve this problem. Because if the problem isn't the money, if the problem isn't the funding, and the VA does take up a huge portion of the federal budget, the VA gets a lot of money. But if the VA is so bureaucratized that it can't function, even with all this money that it's getting, then the problem is not the money. It is the bureaucracy. And the other problem is, too, the VA has not been modernized. Our federal government has not been modernized, except for, the military, of course. This is something Newt Gingrich, not someone who I tend to have a lot of positive things to say about, but one of the positive things that I will say about Newt Gingrich is during the 2012 campaign, he thinks outside of the box, and he was talking about we need to modernize the federal government. And he's right. And no other candidate would talk about this stuff except Newt Gingrich. We need to modernize the government. Part of why the government is so inefficient and ineffective is because it not only is it the size of the government, but the fact that the government uses outdated technology. And the VA is an example of that. A couple of years ago, there was a story about, and I've told this on the air before, just very quickly, there's a story about a building, there's a government building, of course, in Washington, D.C., that houses records for the VA, for our veterans, medical records for our veterans. And when this story broke, this didn't get very much play in the media, not like the current scandal. This, I guess, wasn't a scandal in a sense, but to me it was scandalous. They actually showed pictures of this building with stacks and stacks and stacks. Lots of file cabinets, but also stacks of files not even in file cabinets in this giant room in a building in Washington. And this room is full of paper files of our veterans. And this room is so full, there are so many paper files in this room that they actually had to reinforce the floor because the building has more than one floor. And there is so much paper on this one floor that the floor was beginning to cave in. So they had to actually reinforce the floor so that it didn't cave in and fall into the floor beneath it. It's insane, and that's part of why veterans come home from war and they need help and they're waiting, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years to get any kind of help because they have a freaking paper file in the year 2014, a paper file that goes into a room where it goes into a stack because they can't even fit any more file cabinets in there, and then it sits there. In the year 2014, when we have all this technology with our smartphones and our tablets and everything else, I wonder how many files, veterans files I could fit on this MacBook that I have. I got a lot of stuff on here. It can fit a lot. And our government is still using paper files. It's crazy. Government is not good at modernizing, and it's not good at bureaucracy. All of this stuff should be electronic. It should all be digital. There shouldn't be any paper files. It's maddening. And Newt Gingrich, by the way, is the only one I've ever heard point this out. Nobody else even thinks of this stuff. It's all about the discussion, right, between the left and the right. It's always, the left wants to grow government. The right wants to cut government. It's the wrong conversation. Like so many left-right conversations that we have in this country, here's what I think the conversation should be. How do we modernize the government? Because if you modernize the government and make it run more efficiently, digitally, electronically, and this is just one example with the VA, then everybody wins. You know, you'll save money, right? The more efficient you make things, the less it costs to do these functions. So you'll save money. That should make the right happy. And government, you know, the more it can do, the more efficient it is, the more it can handle, right? So that should make the left happy. Hey, you guys on the left, you love government so much. Well, here, now we're going to make government work even better. So everybody wins if you just take what is there and modernize it. And then we can look at, well, should we cut this? Should we expand this program? What do you want to do with it, with the size of it? But first, let's bring it into the year 2014. Hell, let's bring it into the 1990s. I mean, you know, I see these paper files and it's like, you know, it's maddening. It's just maddening. All right, so now that we're almost out of time, we'll get to the Eric Cantor thing. So I have some thoughts on this. Of course, Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader, was defeated in the primary last night in Virginia by this guy Dave Bratt, Tea Party challenger. And this is stunning for multiple reasons. For one thing, Eric Cantor, a very powerful guy in Congress, of course, the current majority House leader. This is the first time ever in history, in the history of the U.S., that a majority leader has been ousted in a primary. That never happens. No one would have ever imagined this would happen. No one ever imagined that Eric Cantor was in any serious danger. All the polling data shows that he would win, that he would have no problem. He outspent Dave Bratt by, I mean, Eric Cantor, I think, spent $5 million on his campaign, or at least he raised $5 million. Dave Bratt raised something like $500,000, if that. Quite the disparity there in terms of what was raised and what was spent. So it is a stunning upset. Also stunning in the sense that people have been sort of prematurely saying that, you know, the Tea Party is rapidly dying out, that these people are done, and that there is a resurgence to the more, you know, the establishment conservative wing of the Republican Party. So nobody saw this coming. Probably least of all Dave Bratt himself, and certainly not Eric Cantor. But it happened. Here, I'll read to you quickly a little bit of this, because this does have some of the numbers I was talking about. So this is from HuffPost. Amanda Turkle writes this. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor lost his seat in Congress Tuesday in a shocking upset to Dave Bratt, a college professor backed by the Tea Party. With nearly all the votes counted, Bratt had 56% of the vote to Eric Cantor's 44%. That's a 12-point margin in a race that no one thought Dave Bratt had a chance of winning. Cantor had expected to easily win re-election to an 8th term in Virginia's 7th congressional district over Bratt. Cantor raised about $5.5 million compared with Bratt's $200,000. Wow, so that's even more of a disparity than I realized. And as the second most powerful Republican in the House, Cantor's victory seemed secure. The main question seemed to be how big his margin would be over Bratt. No sitting House Majority Leader has lost since 1899. There's more to this, but we're running out of time. But there is a theory, however, that this does not necessarily reflect that the Tea Party is not as, it's not on the way out the way so much of the media has speculated. It's not an indication of any kind of resurgence of the Tea Party necessary, but that Eric Cantor actually beat himself. That Eric Cantor was so visibly out of touch with his own district that they decided, we've had enough of this guy and we're going to get rid of him. It may be more of a rejection of establishment politicians in a broader sense than it is a rejection of establishment conservatives in the Republican Party. Personally, I'm a little bit alarmed at the idea of a resurgence of the Tea Party, because these people scare the hell out of me. for one specific reason. There is one thing about the Tea Partiers that I find terrifying, and Dave Bratt is no exception to this, which is why it amazes me that this guy is an economics professor, because Dave Bratt has already gone on record as saying that if he has to vote on the debt ceiling, which he no doubt will have to vote on at some point while sitting in the United States Congress, he will vote against raising the debt ceiling. And that is what makes these people so dangerous. That is the single most dangerous thing about Tea Party Republicans. They do not believe that we should be raising the debt ceiling. And what I think a lot of people who don't think we should be raising the debt ceiling, what I think they fail to understand is this: raising the debt ceiling is not the same thing as voting to increase federal spending. The debt ceiling and the budget are two different things. When you vote on a budget, you may, as a matter of not wanting to grow the government, you may vote against raising the federal budget because you don't want to see the government continue to escalate spending. But the debt ceiling, it's like raising the limit on your credit card. The debt ceiling is it's agreeing to pay, that the federal government will pay the debt that it has already incurred. So the money's already been spent. So if you fail to raise the limit that the government can borrow to pay that debt, that existing debt, then you are actually in effect voting for default. Think of it this way. If you have a credit card and maybe one month you get a little carried away and you spend a little more on your credit card than you should have, you can't then say, well, we spent too much, so when the bill comes, I'm just not going to pay it. I'm going to choose not to pay it. Think of it that way. Well, what happens if you don't pay it? You default. What happens if you default? Your credit rating takes a hit. Debt collectors are going to start calling you. It's the same thing with the federal government. The big difference being, if the federal government were to, at any point for the first time in our nation's history, actually default on the full faith and credit of the United States debt, then that's it. Economic Armageddon. Seriously. If we actually default on our nation's debt, and any economist will tell you that, it's not just liberals, more Keynesian type economists who will say this, any economist will tell you, even conservative-minded supply-side economists will tell you, it is the most irresponsible thing we could possibly do to default on our nation's debt. And now we got another Tea Partier who managed to get in there, who will vote to default on our nation's debt and who will vote, therefore, for economic Armageddon. And that's not hyperbole, my friends. Any economist will tell you, if this country ever goes into default, that is it. It will make the Great Depression look like the Roaring '20s. It's over. America is over. The global economy is finished. It is the end of everything. I am not kidding you. And that is why these people frighten me so much. I mean, literally, I am terrified of the Tea Party. That's going to do it for this week's television edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed. I'll get more. There's a lot more to say about this situation, about Eric Cantor and everything, so be sure to tune in tomorrow night to the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed, as it is every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Dr. Kevin Radio Network. Just go to dkrn.net, or you can get there through ipmnation.com as well. So thank you all for joining me. And if you do happen to be watching us live on Wednesday, of course, you know the drill. I'll be back at 4 o'clock with Norm and at 6 o'clock with Gary. And that's it for now. I'll talk at you all a little bit later. Thank you.